Whether you're using a brand new PC or one that's getting a little bit older, this video is exactly what you're looking for. In this guide, I'll be going over every setting that the game has to offer, what changes that they're going to make, and finally go over the best settings to use to get the best FPS without sacrificing any in-game quality. Before we get started, please be sure to drop a like on this video as it greatly helps out the channel. Thank you so much, and let's get straight into it. So as you can see, I started a brand new camp here, and the main reason for this is just to show you the difference in frames. Now, I'm currently hovering around 122 FPS. Now, even when I zoom out, it doesn't really go down too much because there's not really too much going on. I just have a couple of people, but as that quickly starts to change, as you can see in this camp here, I've only been playing in this camp for about 2 hours, and as you can see, my frames are a decent bit lower. And that's with using the optimized settings, so that just truly goes to show that this game does take a little bit of tinkering to get to run good, especially as you start to get a little further and your settlement starts to get much larger. Let's get straight into the settings. Now, as you can see in the top left, I do have an FPS counter. Now, I am playing this on PC Game Pass, so for me, for whatever reason, the only FPS counter that I was able to get was fraps. So if you're having any trouble, I strongly recommend just going with fraps and using that. But onto the settings. For me, I am using a RTX 3070, so DLSS just seems to make the most sense. When I go to FSR, I tend to get worse FPS in certain situations. Depending on when I put it to performance, I will actually get graphical bugs. It happens from time to time, obviously because this is meant for AMD cards. Now, if you're on a NVIDIA card, I strongly recommend using DLSS. Now, if you're not getting super good FPS, you can definitely turn this down to balance or performance. You will gain a couple of FPS, although honestly, I did not notice too much, and the same goes for the actual in-game visual change. I did not notice too much actual change. Now, up next is the dynamic DLSS. I have this on, and I believe what this changes is going to be like the things that you can't quite see on screen or the things that you're not really looking at very much. It's going to lower the resolution of those textures, which definitely helps you get a couple of extra FPS. VSync, I keep that off. I have a FreeSync monitor, so I just don't really worry about it. It's just easier to just keep it off. For the frame rate, I just have on unlimited for that same reason. Sharpening, I strongly recommend you keep this off. What sharpening really does is it just basically allows you to see each individual pixel on the screen a lot more, and basically from what I've gotten from it is it just makes the game look more pixelated. It really doesn't ever end up looking good every time I've ever tried it out, and it kind of just has a bad, it just gives a bad look to the game. Like, I don't know. Play around with it though. If you end up liking it, that's kind of one of those settings. It doesn't really hurt your FPS. It's just really up to your liking. Now, next up is going to be shader quality. Now, putting this up to ultra will definitely hurt your FPS a little bit, although it'll make the game look a little bit better. But I've been keeping this on high because it tends to give you about 15 FPS higher. Now, same with the shadow quality. Putting this up to ultra is just going to drop your FPS about 10, and I really don't notice hardly any difference, if any at all, putting this down to high. So I would strongly recommend that you do the same. Post-processing quality, when changing this setting, there is definitely a little bit of a change in the game, especially when you turn it all the way to off. Although, even from ultra to off, there's really not too much of an FPS difference. I mean, I guess I'm going from like 129, but to ultra, I dropped to around 120-ish. I would still recommend keeping that to ultra because no matter what, you're still losing FPS across the board. So keep that one to ultra. Bounce light approximation is kind of similar in that as even dropping it to high, you see no FPS change. Medium, you see no FPS change. And off, you still see no change. I'm not really sure if this setting is actually doing anything or not, but I just keep this on ultra because if it is, well, it's not changing. It's not hurting my FPS any, so you might as well. Now, next up is volumetric clouds. This is definitely going to have a little bit of a different effect, but really only when you go into the first-person view here. Now, as you can see, when you look up in the sky, there's not really any clouds right now, but I'd be willing to bet if you mess with this setting and you turn this on and off, it will have a huge effect on the way the clouds look. Next up is going to be the terrain texture resolution. Now, if you're running a little bit older graphics card, I would definitely recommend putting this down to high, as that's going to make it much easier on your graphics card to just output. Now, if you're running a newer graphics card, you'll probably be fine keeping this on ultra, but play around with it and see what that does for you. Next up is view distance. I really recommend keeping this on ultra just to keep things like looking as good as possible. But if you need to, dropping this down will definitely increase your FPS a good little bit. Now, I really wouldn't recommend going any lower than medium, but medium will gain you about 3 or 4 FPS out of ultra. But honestly, I'd probably just keep it on ultra for the most part unless you're really struggling with the game. Next up is going to be the grass density and the grass distance. Now, for both of these, as we put these through ultra to high to medium to low, you see literally zero change in my FPS and in how the game looks. I would strongly recommend just keeping both of these on ultra, because if they're actually doing anything, they're not hurting your FPS just like the other ones before, so just keep it on ultra for now. If anything changes, I will be making an update video, so everybody can change that then. And the last thing is going to be the foliage quality. Now, putting this up to ultra is going to hurt your FPS a little bit, but for the most part, I would recommend, if you can, keep this on ultra, because it's just going to make the game look a little bit better, and overall, from ultra to low, you're only really going to lose about 3 FPS. Now, as I've gone through the settings, you may have taken notice that I pretty much have everything on near ultra or just maxed out. Now, my reason for doing this is basically I have a pretty decent PC, and so far I really haven't had any need to lower anything besides the sharpening and the shader and the shadow quality. Now, lowering these off of ultra allowed me to get around 130 FPS even while it's raining, and it's pretty demanding on the game. Now, if I turn these up to ultra, as you can see, my FPS literally dropped almost 20. So I would strongly recommend keeping both of these on high, and even just that, try just those 2 settings and see what that does for you, because honestly, those 2 settings alone, matched while putting the DLSS on quality, is more than enough to keep my game more than playable. Now, if we put this over to performance, like I said before, you really don't see any change. Now, I thought this was kind of weird, so I just keep it on quality, but if we go over to TAA, look at how fast my frames instantly drop. From what I've seen too, the game honestly looks better with DLSS on quality. Now, like I said before, if you have an AMD card, I strongly recommend trying FSR quality. Now, you see my frames are lower, but that's just because I have an NVIDIA card. So if you're running AMD, I strongly recommend trying FSR before you try TAA or FXAA. Although, if you are running an older card that doesn't support either of these, I strongly recommend, honestly, just keeping it off, because otherwise it's just going to make the game so hard to run that it's just not going to be possible, especially on an older graphics card. But if this video helped you out, I really hope that you'd be willing to give it a like and definitely consider subscribing, because I'm going to be having a bunch more Manor Lords videos coming out very soon. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.